to live authentically can seem really appealing.
Cultivating courage.
There is a certain freedom that comes along with it.
And its impact on our ability to be vulnerable.
How do I know what authenticity is?
Ignore your fears. Face your fears.
What is authentic? And what is your brain, your ego?
I really would like to kind of redefine what we mean when we say courage.
Hey there, I'm Reverend Dan. We are Soul Evolution Collaborative, a nonprofit based in universal spiritual principles, offering possibilities for navigating the evolution of life in an authentic and intentional way. And this is Truth Be Told 2.0, a weekly series that is changing the norms, bringing you inspiring and uplifting messages to look at life a little bit differently. This is episode 118, the first in our series on cultivating authenticity. This is where we look at what it takes to even recognize our authentic self. Got to be yourself because everybody else is already taken, right? So throughout this series, we will explore the practice of cultivating authenticity, which empowers us to fully step into all areas of life. Brene Brown, who has dedicated her work to this focus, says authenticity is letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we are. Cultivating authenticity is about releasing those patterns of thoughts, attitudes, the actions that act as barriers to our personal truth and power. It is about developing the courage to be vulnerable enough to become even more of exactly who you are. The idea of being able to live authentically can seem really appealing. There is a certain freedom that comes along with it, like freedom from the thoughts and criticisms of others, empowered to make the decisions about your life that are best for you. But whenever the conversation of authenticity comes up, it almost always seems to come with the question or something like it, but how do I know what authenticity is? As in, how do we determine what is authentic and what is your brain, your ego, trying to play tricks on you so to not have to do the real work? And we all do it. It happens for all of us. You know, I think we've all seen the bypass parading as authenticity. It just kind of seems wacky, right? And yet it is often applauded as authenticity. And really, I think that only happens when we are unfamiliar with authenticity. So it kind of seems like a bit of a catch-22, right? Like, how do we recognize authenticity if we're unfamiliar with authenticity? How do we become familiar with authenticity if we're unfamiliar? It kind of has this weird, like, cycle. And so it only is natural that we have this, that we're familiar with this parading inauthentic authenticity, or whatever we're going to call that. So I'm here to say that authenticity, cultivating authenticity, starts by cultivating awareness of who we are. Self-awareness is super important in cultivating authenticity. See, what happens is we're searching for this blueprint for authenticity. What does authenticity look like? And I think this can seem really confusing because we tend to look out there at the world because that's how we have been raised. That's how we learn things. We look at our parents, our teachers, our community, whoever. We are taught by people outside of us how to exist in the world. And so when the idea of authenticity comes up, we're looking outside of us at those same people or at friends and peers and media or wherever for what authenticity looks like. And yet, obviously, that puts us in a place where we are looking outside of ourselves. We're looking at someone else to show us what we should be, which is the opposite of authenticity. This creates this whole story for us. This practice creates a whole story for us about what we're supposed to look like, all based on things outside of ourselves. And so the process of domestication, what's talked about if you're familiar with the book, The Four Agreements, domestication, the process of just learning how to be a human. We pick up all of these stories and lessons and baggage, and that process can be great when we're guided through it. What happens is we tend not to be guided through it well, and so the things that we picked up a long time ago that were helpful, probably not so helpful anymore. And so we're carrying around very unhelpful story and baggage, things like, oh, TV says I'm supposed to look like, or I'm supposed to act like, or I'm supposed to do these things or not do these things. The blueprint for authenticity, or the blueprint for who we think we're supposed to be, becomes this thing outside of ourselves. And guess what? That ain't ever going to bring us authenticity. What brings us authenticity is that thing that is in us, that self that is within us that knows, and yet we're not always taught to listen to or even look for that self or know how to recognize that self. And so authenticity starts with self-awareness, shedding the story, the patterns, the habits, the actions, the beliefs that don't really serve us anymore, maybe never did. And so we begin the practice of self-reflection and looking inward to see, what is it that life has taught me that maybe is not true, or not true anymore, or maybe true but not helpful, or both, or whatever version of story and domestication we've picked up that needs to be shed. We start shedding that. And so we learn to be who we are by shifting our story, by changing our story, by shifting our beliefs, by shedding those habits and patterns, the things that we learned as self-protection, as coping mechanisms, usually as children, that as adults don't necessarily have the same impact. They're not effective, or maybe they're even damaging at this point. When we recognize that we are not those things, we're not those patterns, we're not those beliefs, we're not even our thoughts, and we start to figure out who we actually are, all of a sudden we have this self-awareness to recognize, like, oh, if I act from this place of hurt or pain or story or belief or whatever, something, it's a voice or whatever that we've picked up that's not actually ours. When we can shed that, all of a sudden we start to become more familiar with who we are. And when we're more familiar with who we are, we have the ability to act authentically. And so self-awareness is the ability to recognize and understand your own thoughts and feelings and behaviors. And it really is this essential component of authenticity. And the more familiar we become with ourselves, the more empowered we become to examine our own thought patterns, to make conscious choices about who we want to be and how we want to show up in the world. And so authenticity starts with self-awareness. While you're here, remember to hit like, subscribe, maybe even drop a comment. We would love to hear from you, and thanks for watching.
In this conversation around cultivating authenticity, it really wouldn't be complete without a little bit of focus on this idea of courage and cultivating courage and its impact on our ability to be vulnerable, which then impacts our ability to step into our life more authentically. Did you catch that train of thought? Well, anyway, so when we're talking about courage, often we think about face your fears or ignore your fears and just be brave and be courageous. I'm not talking about that type of courage. In fact, I really would like to kind of redefine what we mean when we say courage. So for our conversation here, what I mean in my own definition of courage is this understanding that sometimes there is discomfort. Sometimes there's fear, sometimes there's doubt, sometimes there's unwillingness, sometimes there are things that stand in our way of being our most authentic self, whether it's systems or frameworks or all those things that lie in our space that often impact our ability to be vulnerable and impact our ability to step into our own authenticity. So courage is the recognition of those things, the recognition of those experiences, the recognition of the discomfort sometimes that we feel when we're stepping into spaces that we've never stepped into before, or we're exploring our own self-awareness of who and what we are. And then in that exploration, we find out these new and exciting things, and then we begin to exercise those in the world. And so sometimes that means stepping out in ways we've never stepped out before, and that can be scary. So for me, courage is not ignoring the fears, not ignoring the discomfort, but understanding the discomfort and then working our way through it. It's natural for us to want to avoid those things that are uncomfortable. And I think our whole life is kind of this balance of seeking comfort. You know, our bodies are always seeking balance, always seeking that comfort level. And so, yeah, we want to avoid the discomfort. But I would like to posit, if we could sit in that discomfort just maybe just a minute longer than we think we can, then what opens up for us is this experience of authenticity. If we are able to meet those new adventures, or meet those growing pains, or meet those growing edges of our experience with curiosity, like we've talked about last month, and then be able to sit and ask questions about the discomfort, ask questions about maybe what's getting in the way, ask questions about maybe the systems and frameworks that are impacting our own ability to be vulnerable and authentic and impacting those around us, and begin to ask questions and activate that sort of courage, that courage of sitting in the discomfort, that courage of asking questions in the discomfort. And then from that space, moving from the discomfort into that next great expression, which we know each and every day is an opportunity for us to be our authentic selves. And so authenticity is not something that is like the finish line and we get there and we're done. But I think it's this everyday thing, because every day we're exploring new things about ourselves. Every day we have new opportunities to become vulnerable in relationships and situations, to really open ourselves up to what the next thing is. And so every day is this exploration and authenticity. And so when we begin to cultivate courage, when we begin to cultivate our willingness to be vulnerable, then it really cracks open this authenticity code, if you will, and really allows us to begin to explore what that actually looks like out there in the world. And so then we could begin to embrace who we are and really cultivate authenticity. And then when we do that, we invite others to do the same. And let me tell you, it is like a cascade of authenticity. And honestly, it's what's needed. And I think it's what will transform the world.